I am not a mistake. You are not a mistake. We are born with destiny, but we all have one destination, and that is coming home to this one essential truth, and that is you were born perfect. We are perfect in our expressions. We are enough. We are loved. We are loved. And only love is real. Hello, beautiful beings of light. I hope you all are well. I wanted to make this video. It is a few days before the new moon on November 4th, and my birthday is on November 4th. We've just entered eclipse season. It's this time of transformation, and we're in Scorpio season now that's all about death and rebirth and transformation and the crumbling away of old, outdated structures and templates and belief systems. And it's like a perfect time for me anyway, with my solar return coming up, to reflect. And I've been reflecting a lot this year. I am 43 on November 4th, and I am 3 years past my life expectancy, what I believed for a long time was my life expectancy. And so I've been reflecting a lot lately on what is a lifetime and my journey. Many people ask me in my conversations about my journey, step by step, how did I go from a person that was essentially waiting to die for many years, someone that was not wanting to be on the earth plane anymore, someone that had spent time in a wheelchair and learning how to walk again, and essentially was just kind of written off as this like hopeless case, this case of no treatment, no cure, degenerative, how did I go from that to the person I am now? And, in order for them to replicate that process. And that's a really tough thing to kind of, sit down and, try to parcel out, what have I done? How did I do that? So I wanted to kind of like satisfy some of that as well. I think that, first of all, I need to like put a disclaimer in this video, which is the fact that I do not speak for everyone with Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. I do not pretend to speak for an entire group of people. I do not speak for all people that are parents to children with special needs, or, people with genetic condition, or with, neurodiversity, I do not speak for everyone. I speak for myself and my truth and my journey. And, every person is different and unique in their expression on this, in this experience school of life. And this is just, what I've come to learn through my experience. So I think first I should probably note that I was born with a rare connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. It is a mutation of the collagen gene in our DNA, and it most prevalently affects the connective tissues of our body. So the connective tissue in the physical body makes up pretty much everything. It is your skin, it's your tissues, it's your muscle, it's your joints, it is your organs. So it impacts or has the potential to impact, every single aspect of the physical body. There are many different types of EDS, and for myself, the main manifestation that I've experienced in my life is dislocating joints. So I'm extremely, hyper extendable, hyper flexible, and most of my joints either partially dislocate or dislocate fully spontaneously upon movement. So that's been the main manifestation that I've experienced throughout my journey. And then, also subsets of that that affect the organs, such as, migraine, what's known as dysautonomia. That can come with the way that your central nervous system operates, regulates your body temperature, feelings of anxiety or brain fog. I was diagnosed with a hole between the chambers of my hearts, kidney reflux. I could probably go through a list like this long of all the various different individual diagnoses that I have had as a result of this kind of umbrella diagnoses. And at one time was seeing 15 different specialists for different parts of my body. So at the time that I was diagnosed was not until much later in my life, although I had, my first dislocation at the age of 2. It started when I was young with my elbows and my knees and like serious back pain and spinal pain and things like that. But I wasn't diagnosed until my mid-20s. And I had an explosion of symptoms, which is very similar story that many people with EDS will tell you. It's kind of like your connective tissue will hold, the physical body for a certain point, and then, everything just kind of breaks down. And in my particular case, I had kind of a crisis, in my personal life that also put a lot of stress on my emotional body, which kind of then, I think, pushed everything over the edge. So, but in my particular case, I was diagnosed at a time where there was not, social media as we know it today. There were not support groups. Very, little was known about the condition. And at the time I was diagnosed, it was treated as though you had a vascular type. And people with a vascular type of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome typically have a lifespan of about 40 years because the heart is also just connective tissue. And it cannot, it essentially will just stretch to the point where there's failure or rupture. And so I was treated from the time I was diagnosed as if I was going to be experiencing that, and was told not to expect to live past 40. And I operated under that belief for many years, in fact. And it kind of, was an overarching theme as to my perception of life, my perception on how my life was going to go, on how the script was going to play itself out. And it lended itself to, this, downward spiral, as you were. So at the lowest point, I think, I was experiencing so much pain in my physical body for, such a prolonged period of time. And the messaging that I was getting from, doctors and specialists were, there is nothing that we can do for you. And the best you can expect is try to stay comfortable until you die. That I gave up. I was searching for answers through Western medicine, through medication, through big pharma. I, had tried other modalities, certainly, over the course of many years. And I got to a point where I didn't see a reason any longer that, I was existing, and I wasn't even surviving. I was existing. I was very, very over medicated, heavily medicated, prescribed, like 18 different medications in any one given day. And I just didn't see a point to it anymore. I felt like I had been fighting to get back to this person that I was never going to get back to again. And I'd seen so many different doctors and specialists and traveled all over looking for the answers. And, outside of myself, which is, very typical of, any spiritual awakening and any 3D experience, is this feeling of separateness and looking outside of ourselves, only seeing 3D reality, feeling that life is happening to us, not understanding we are creating our experience. And that was the state of my awareness at the time, that I essentially, woke up one day just spontaneously and decided that, I didn't want to be here anymore. And obviously I'm still here. So, through that experience, you would have thought, I had, this, it wasn't like a typical near-death experience. I didn't experience anything, like magical. And it was more just a kind of like an astral projection experience that I had at the time. That would have, renewed the spark of, wanting to live life and, being grateful. But I wasn't. It really didn't change anything for me. And if anything, I was kind of more resolute that, I wanted to exit. And it was actually, becoming pregnant with my son that changed everything for me personally in my journey. And that kind of started me on this slow progression up the vibrational scale, where, all of a sudden now I had someone outside of myself to think of. And that for me was probably the biggest catalyst in my spiritual awakening. But it's not an overnight process. I think many times, people that have discovered the fact that we're more than just this, physical body, that it's more than just a 3D reality, that we are creating our reality, that we got ourselves in the position that we're in, either with, dis-ease or, depression, what you want to label mental illness. Sorry, my dog saw a squirrel and she will just, go absolutely mental to try to get out the window to get to it. So, but yeah, so I really think that, once you discover that you have essentially, placed yourself, quite inadvertently, although I'll go on in the video to say that I believe that's all part of the plan. But you may feel that or discover that. It's like you want a instant manifestation. We want a quantum leap. We want to embody the state, and we want to get to where we're going. And if you think about nature and you think about unfolding of nature and the seasons, a flower doesn't, go from seed to in full bloom just overnight. It's a process. And it's, moving your way up the vibrational scale is also a process. And you can't just jump from completely like the lowest end of the vibrational scale of feeling despair and grief and an unwillingness to continue on in a journey to completely healed and the embodiment of love and bliss like overnight. It's an unfolding and it's a process, and you have to tick your way up the ladder. And it's I don't want to say it takes time. I mean, it is possible, I suppose. But what you'll find is that you will have bypassed, many of the rungs in between, and you'll find yourself, moving, up and down, back and forth. So, for myself, it's really taken 10 years. It's taken 10 years for me to get to the lowest end of the vibrational scale where I had resided or persisted in that state of being for, at least 5 to 8 years, and, had struggled with these scripts and templates throughout my entire lifetime up until that point. So for some, 30 years to get to embodying a state that was stable in the higher, the upward trajectory of the vibrational scale. That's taken 10 years. So not to say that it will take you 10 years. There was a large part of that where I was completely unaware that I was creating my own reality. And, that's also part of this journey, is this coming into this awareness and this understanding that you are manifesting and counter manifesting, whether you're aware of it or not. You're expanding and you're moving, up the vibrational scale, whether you're aware that you're doing that or not. And, that's part of this knowing that we have, that we come down, incarnate into these avatars, into these physical bodies with a template, with a blueprint. And I talk about that extensively in my Contact with the Terra group and Tethering. It's understanding that we are corded and tethered into these vibrations, and they make up our spiritual, our soul's, fingerprint, this blueprint. And we have the individual expression of that in these avatars and these energy centers, but then we have the quantum embodiment of that with the loom and our I am presence, and the multifaceted, multidimensionality of us as humans. And so once I became aware of that, once I became aware that I was manifesting and counter manifesting and creating these scripts, which really I've only come into this, this perspective, really over the last few years. And certainly the awareness that I was creating my own reality has only happened, over the last, I want to say like 4 years. Because I was on the spiritual journey. I was, awakening, but I hadn't come to this quantum understanding of reality and the game and how it's played until just a few years ago, really. So, had I been aware of that sooner, of course, but do I regret anything? No, I don't. I don't regret any aspect of my lifetime and the journey that I've taken. And I think that's a big part of it. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about when we're discussing, like, okay, what are the steps, in moving up the vibrational scale? What have I learned now, as I approach my solar return and 3 years past, what was believed to be my life expectancy? What is the knowingness and what is the understanding of my journey, and what has it all meant for me. And so I'd say certainly the first part of this that I've come into this understanding is that, and I hear people discuss this a lot, like, okay, well, if you're creating your own reality, then, what about people that are born with genetic condition, with birth defect, with special needs, did they create this themselves? And, what is that? How does that all work? Is this like a quantum entanglement? Is this some sort of curse? Is this, because we're in this prison, planet, and, we are being controlled? Like how does that all work? So the understanding I've come into is that we are born with a blueprint. Okay. We are born with a destiny, and it's all about how we ride that experience. That is our choice, and is where we have creation ability and ability to influence the script and the layer of reality that we are living in. So if you were born with genetic condition, if you were born with birth defect, if you were born with, being not neurotypical, if you're considered to have special needs in some way, I would say that is not a mistake, and you chose this, and that you are actually adding to the evolution and the expansion of our human consciousness. You may be classified as disabled, okay? I would prefer to say uniquely abled. But that is only based on a societal program and a societal template. You may be classified as having special needs. You may be classified as being abnormal or not typical in some way. And so when it comes up against the test of societal programs and, societal norms, you may be labeled with, a certain diagnosis or a certain label, or you may be told that you are atypical in some way. And that's fine. That's fine if that's how society chooses to view someone like me or someone like my son. Okay. But from my perspective, I was born with a different operating system. Okay. And that just means that my DNA and my expression of my physical body of this human avatar looks different than a large section of the population. But that does not mean, right, that there's something wrong with me or that there's something wrong with him. It simply means that we have to learn our own operating systems, and we have to learn how to vibe in the way that our operating systems express themselves. Okay, so for me personally, one of the biggest breakthroughs for me in becoming more healed in my life and more accepting in my life was to, number one, take the pressure off of yourself of having to be anybody else but you. Take the pressure off of yourself of having to be anybody else than who you are. Because just because you cannot operate under a system or a program that was laid out before you doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And I would challenge anyone that believes otherwise to say that you are breaking the mold. You're breaking these templates. When you cannot conform to societal norms and societal templates, you have no choice but to either find a way of thriving with your operating system or crumble. And my biggest, I wouldn't want to say mistake, but one thing I did for many years was I tried to get back to a societal norm or a way of being or a way of living that was acceptable to everyone else. Instead of just learning that my body, the way my physical efforting looked, the way that my energy, the way that I flowed through this dreamscape was different. And if I could learn my operating system and how to harness that and how to work with that, then I could be in a state of ease and not a state of dis-ease. And I think a lot of dis-ease, whether that's mentally or physically, comes from this expectation of being, doing, having, looking like everybody else. Okay? But when you are doing things your own way, when you're honoring yourself, honoring your blueprint, honoring your specific template, your blueprint, and how it's made up, you are actually pushing humanity forward. Okay? If you can't eat the same foods everyone else is eating because your body won't accept that, it rejects that, it forces the collective to then look at other ways of feeding the body, of growing food. Okay? If you cannot work a matrix 9-to-5 job because your physical body cannot support that, then we have to look and create something different, which breaks a barrier, which breaks a template, which breaks a program. Programs that were actually holding us back in our evolution, in the collective expansion and ascension and consciousness. So in actuality, many of the people that we say are disabled, that are not typical, that are abnormal in some way, are the trendsetters, are the very first. We are the ones that are breaking the molds. We're breaking the boundaries. We are looking at these constructs and saying, I can't operate under that. And I can either persist and bang on a closed door, or I can simply open a window and find a different way. So you were born for a reason, and that reason is to push our evolutionary blueprints, our operating systems forward. And you are part of the very first that are doing things different, thinking different, creating differently. You are learning to navigate this human journey in a way that isn't like everyone else, and that's okay. So for me, I think step number 1 was to take the pressure off of myself, to stop expecting that I needed to treat a certain way, that I needed to live my life a certain way, that disability looked a certain way, that, I needed, in order to embody success and health, that I needed to do things like everyone else was doing them. So I stopped doing all of that. And I started looking at what felt good for me. How could I move my body one day and know that that was going to cause pain, and rest my body the next day and relieve myself from pain? Because the model that I was shown was, you sit in a bed, you muscle waste, but then your joints aren't dislocating. Well, when you're sitting for prolonged periods of time, when you're lying down for prolonged periods of time, then that makes your pain even worse. And so for me, it became about, okay, how do I learn to push my body to move and do, but not too much? And then how do I learn to rest my body to recuperate? And when I'm resting my body, does that mean that, I have to be depressed and, wasting and, not being a part of everything simply because I'm tucked away? No, I have access to, so many people through our technology. I have my imagination. I have the ability to write. I have the ability to create. I can still use my hands, even though I'm stuck in a bed. So for me, it was a slow process of honoring and pushing at the same time. And I stopped needing other people's approval for that. And I stopped feeling like I let go of this expectation that I had to perform a certain way and that I was letting people down if I didn't, So that's why you'll see me, very active and engaged on some days, and other days it may take me days to return messages, because I've learned to know when my days of being, outside, and when to come within, and when I am energetically able to channel, when am I energetically able to hold conversation, when am I energetically able to physically effort. And so from a societal point of view, that may look like I'm disabled, but to me, it looks like I'm honoring my operating system. I'm honoring my physical body, my mental body, my emotional body, the totality of myself. And I feel wonderful in that. And that's all that really matters. It's the state that you're embodying, and learning to let go of expectation, not just your expectation of others, but your expectation of yourself. And so that was a big part of when things really began to shift for me. The other thing that really changed things for me was taking the focus off of myself. I think, we get into these self-preservation modes where all we're doing is trying to survive. And all of the focus and attention goes on the illness or the dis-ease or the depression or the problem, as it were. Okay. And when you stop seeing yourself as a problem, then you can take your focus off of that. So the first step in that was when I had my son. Now, obviously, that was fraught with a lot of trauma and a lot of complication given my diagnosis. So for a while, it drove me further down until I could kind of realize that I was going to be okay and he was okay. I was on bed rest the entire pregnancy. I was hospitalized for the last trimester. Both of my hips dislocated from the pregnancy. So I had to lie there in hospital for 3 months with 2 dislocated hips. And then obviously his delivery was premature and complicated, and he was in a NICU. And because my hips had been dislocated for such a long period of time, I wasn't able to walk straight away. So there was a period of time where it was very scary. It was frightening. It was intense. But once I got through that period and I realized that we both lived and we were going to continue to live, and what was I going to do now, right? Once you get through that crisis point, it's like, okay, this is reality now, and we're both here and we both need to make the best of it. I looked at him and realized that he deserved everything this life had to offer simply by being born. And I realized this false expectation that I had placed on myself, that somehow I didn't deserve that. I wasn't worthy of that. And that, I was being punished for something and I deserved that somehow. Like that the way that I was born was wrong or bad. And I think that's another thing that's, imposed upon people that are, different. Somehow they're not enough, that you're not conforming, you're not subscribing to a certain state of being. And so I began to take the focus off of me and place that on him. And, a lot of times I think when we put ourselves outside of, we take that focus, and I think that goes for anyone in any state. I think that if you're down and you're out and you're feeling really crap about your life, the best thing you can do is help someone else, because then your perspective will begin to shift, and you'll begin to see that, you were really in a state and holding a state that was a little bit skewed. And so the next thing for me that really shifted me out of a long state of, density was to take the focus away from myself and start, being happy about waking up every morning and, getting to see this beautiful little creature and, what was he doing every day? And then it became about, well, if, when he was also diagnosed as having EDS, okay, well, if he has EDS, if he was born this way and nothing's wrong with him, then I need to be able to be the best version of myself to, model for him that there's nothing wrong. And, that shifted in my mind was a huge perspective shift for me. And then I really began diving down this, this self-inquiry, this self-help, and, how was I going to unfold into the best version of who I was? And as you start moving up those states, I think the next kind of phase that comes from that is you begin to, not be so afraid anymore of taking risks, of making mistakes, of, jumping in with both feet. Your intuition begins to kick in, and you start to honor your guidance system again. You start to honor your guidance system. And that would be, probably my next suggestion to anyone that's, endeavoring down this path is to find something, anything that you feel passionate about, that, sparks joy for you. And, it could be a small thing. It could be a book. It could be, creating a playlist of positive music. It could be, learning how to, do a different art form. It could be anything. It could be gardening. It could be, having a passion for a, certain type of movie and cinematography. So you start seeking out, those, anything that's outside of the problem of you that makes you that distracts you, that allows you to put the fullness of your consciousness in something that's outside of you as the problem and you needing a solution. So I think that would probably be, the next thing that I did in the journey. And once that happened, I began to then really stop being fearful of taking risks, of taking big leaps that were really pushing me, looking back on it now, were pushing me onto higher timelines and higher lifelines. And so I was meditating on this today, and this is what they showed me, and I thought it was pretty cool. Okay, so I was meditating, and this is not the best image, so but it serves its purpose. But so I was meditating on this morning, and the idea of destiny, and the idea of what, if I was born this way, if I was born with this template and this blueprint, and I was meant to be born, genetically modified in the way that I am. And, I don't want this to sound, like ego driven, but I was shown that, the way that the physical body is composed, the composite of my body just happens to be, because of this expansion and because of this difference, and because of humanity. And it's not just me, there are so many children now and people that are being born a little bit different and special, and that are going to continue to break these molds and these templates as we move higher in frequency. And if you're born with a higher dominant resonant frequency, then your genetic composition might be a little bit different. But if we're born with destiny, right? If we have this destiny and we have this blueprint, and tethering exists, and everything I've been channeling is, truth, then what aspect of it, as the I am presence, as a creator, do we have control over? And really, what are the limitations there? That you're still learning what you came, you're still serving your mission, but you're also creating the highest and best timeline that you can for yourself. And so what they showed me is this. So if you think of yourself as, the ocean is the total I am of all of us, of the collective, and you as a wave, okay? And you're born with this, and you grow and grow in momentum, and, then eventually you move back into the oneness of everything there is. And if you look at as riding the wave and you think about the ocean, you can either be in the aspect of the wave that is dense and, tumultuous, and is, you're struggling to swim, you're struggling to survive, you can't keep your head above water, and you're just trying to make it. Or you could be at the part of the wave that's, riding on top with your surfboard, and you have complete and total control. And if you think of this as the vibrational scale, and each one of these little tethers as, an aspect of yourself and what's available to you within any given lifetime, you're still living, you're still all a part of this wave. You just get to choose where you want to be in that wave. And that's all my experience has really been about. It was, understanding that, I came in with this really dense program and template. And I knew that that's, what my experience was going to be. But because I spent so long there, I couldn't help but rise, and that is the whole kind of purpose of a dualistic reality. In the 3 and the 4D is also dualistic in nature, is, these catalyzing experiences that propel us up into our ascension. And as we move up in frequency, as we rise closer to the ether and become more etheric, become more crystalline, we no longer need these dense, tumultuous experiences, because our consciousness has risen. But where we are at in this game, in this illusion, in the 3 and now 4D reality, that's what it is, It's kind of the name of the game. And so this whole experience has been about learning, to move from this low, dense, tumultuous, crisis-driven, dis-ease, resistant state into this higher state of being. And it really is just a perspective shift. So as I began taking the focus off of the illness, taking the focus and attention off of just surviving in a Western medical pendulum, and I'm not against Western medicine. So I'm not, I don't want the takeaway to be from this that, Western medicine is bad. But it is a pendulum. It is its own thought form construct, and it's just like any state. When we become too immersed in it, it begins to control us. And I was not in control of any aspect of my life. And so I began to make these big leaps. And then I think for me, looking back and trying to, deconstruct this, the next thing, and this was all a natural unfolding. You guys need to understand, I wasn't trying to do anything but follow my urge, follow my intuition, follow my urge, follow what felt like the next right thing, the next best thing. And so I began to come into contact with, mainly for me, it was my partner that the last time he had known me was when I was, in my late teens, early 20s. And so he viewed me as someone that was healthy and not disabled and not sick and not completely incapable of, tasks of daily living. And because he saw me that way, I began to see myself that way. And there's a lot to be said for the scripting that we set up around us that reaffirms the state that we are living in. And so I moved across country. I moved to a different location. I moved to a different town. I, began creating friendships and connections with people that had nothing to do with my medical status, nothing to do with EDS, nothing to do with the story that I had been telling myself for so many years. And I decided to remove myself from the narrative and the scripting that was all about, I'm dying, there's no treatment, there is no cure, I'm degenerating, it's never going to get better, it's only going to get worse. You need a bone marrow transplant, a stem cell transplant, you should be in palliative care. I began to very slowly tease that out of my life. And it wasn't like I had to cut anyone out. I had to do anything. All I needed to do was shift the focus and attention away from the fact that I was so identified as this person with EDS, and I'm, began just being, began being a human again. And yes, I was, I'm meant to be born this way. This is a large part of my journey, but it's not who I am. And a lot of times what happens when you become diagnosed or you get a diagnosis, what starts as a relief then begins to turn into your identification. And that can be with anything, because prior to my diagnoses, I was very overly identified with my career and the role that I had. And again, that's a very 3D perspective. It's, I am my marital status, I am my career status, I am my medical status, I am the house that I live in, I am the income that I have. It's this very 3D. So quite naturally then I began to move more into a 4D perspective of things. And from that point then is where I really began to challenge my own belief systems on what could I do? Could I buy a house that had stairs in it? Yes, I can. I could do that. And that might work out or it might not. Like, could I, get on a bike again? Yes, I can. I could do that. And in the beginning, I could only go, to the end of the road and back. But it's a slow and steady process. And still now it is for me. So, for example, every year now we host this big Halloween party, and it's really because of my son and his love of skeletons, which he used as kind of like his sigil when he was going through all this medical testing. When he was really just a toddler, he learned that skeletons were, symbolic of regeneration and transmutation and the temporal nature of all things. And so that just kind of has snowballed into us celebrating Halloween every year and celebrating that all things are, constantly changing and transition. But in order to get ready for this party, it took me, 5 days of physically efforting first, as much as I could, and then resting. And we had this lovely party. And then yesterday I did nothing. My phone is off, everything there is, I'm not doing chores. I'm not using my physical body. I'm resting because I know that, I'm going to be in extreme pain. But now, I look at it like, well, maybe I won't be. And, I try to view every day as a surprise on, what's going to happen next. But it is a process. It's a process of pushing your limits, but honoring your boundaries. And, just because you can't ride all the way around the block the first time you get on a bike in 20 years doesn't mean you can't ride a bike. It just means that day, that's how far you can go. And that's really, I think, in a nutshell, the easiest way I could, advise somebody or, mentor someone on moving from a state of what's really, if you think about it, it's really a state of separateness to a state of oneness. It's really a state of resistance to a state of acceptance, because I was resisting who I was. For most of my life, I was resisting the fact that I was born this way, and that because of that, my life wasn't going to look like this cookie cutter life that everybody else was living. And that resistance is what ultimately led me to a state of dis-ease. And yes, do I still have EDS? Yes, I do. Do I have to do things differently? Yes, I do. Am I okay with that now? Absolutely. Am I happy and healthy? Yes, because over the course of this 10 years, I didn't need the 18 medications anymore. I found other ways of treating my pain that were holistic in nature. And this all happened quite naturally. The certain, manifestations went away entirely and healed themselves. I wasn't focused on that. I was simply focused on what felt good, what felt right, what was the next thing that I wanted to endeavor, that I wanted to try. And naturally, I began to rise. When you think of the lowest ends of this vibrational scale, it really is a state of separateness to a state of oneness. And in that process, from moving from dense to more light, and I will continue to do that. I no longer believe that, my lifespan is over at 40. I'm 43 in 2 days, and I am happier and healthier now than I was a decade ago. And, it doesn't stop here, and it doesn't stop at all. We are eternal. We are forever. And I think, I was meditating on this yesterday, and I think if I could say something to any of you, it would be that you are enough just as you are. You're here for a reason. You're where you're at for a reason. And even if things seem hopeless and dark, they're not. And there is light on the other side. And to take the pressure off of yourself. You don't have to be anything. You don't have to live up to any certain expectation. All you have to do on this journey is love. Love, and let yourself be loved. Let yourself be supported, and love others and meet them where they're at. Because you never know what's on the other side. You never know. If I were to have sat and imagined that I'd be here in this now moment, in this space, in this place, in this point, rotating on its axis on the earth in this big giant galaxy, and that I'd be, channeling higher dimensional beings, and I'd be doing half the stuff that I'm doing, I wouldn't have imagined it. I couldn't imagine anything. And I think that's, when we're in these low states, that's what really keeps us stuck, is that we can't imagine anything but the state we're in. So take small steps, take little steps, do little things. It might just be looking at yourself in the mirror. I really went through a period of years where I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror. Don't discount the smallest thing, because that is going to snowball into the next and the next and the next. So happy new moon to all of you. Happy transformation. If you're a Scorpio, then happy solar return. And allow things to shift and crumble and shake. Allow them to break away. Because I'm telling you, you never know what's around the bend. So I'm sending you all big, 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 big love. Bye.
Just wanted to say I love ya. Scully loves ya. Bye.